So I want to take a guess which animal is mentioned the most in the Bible? Sheep. It's sheep. It's a lamb. It's a little fluffy lamb. Sheep, the two words are mentioned some 400 times in the scriptures. It's the most common metaphor that God has chosen in his word to describe the relationship that will exist between his people and himself, the sheep and the shepherd. What a beautiful picture. It appears in the Old Testament, it appears in the New Testament, and it shows up right here in John chapter 10, which is where we find ourselves this morning. If you're just joining us, we are journeying through the Gospel of John. We find ourselves in John chapter 10 this morning, where Jesus tells a parable, and it's a parable about shepherd and sheep. And as we're finding as we go here, as usual, the people do not understand what Jesus is saying. They miss the point, and he has to clarify the point. We're not going to miss the point today. We're going to get it. We're in one of the most really kind of beloved chapters of the Bible, describing this beautiful imagery and this unique relationship that exists that we'll unpack a little bit more between sheep and a shepherd. We'll talk about how he is the good shepherd, and we'll talk about how we can be good sheep. Right? So John chapter 10 is where we're at. We are looking at verse 1. Here we go. Jesus says, "Truly I tell you," truly, right? This is the old truly, truly, the old King James, verily, verily, I say to you, right? This basically when Jesus says this, truly I tell you, like, listen, you got to get this, right? Truly, when he does that truly introduction, I'm telling you the truth. This is really important. I don't want you to miss this. Here's what he says: anyone who doesn't enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate, he's the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens it for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. And when he has brought all his own outside, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will never follow a stranger. Instead, they will run away from him because they don't know the voice of strangers. Jesus gave them this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them, right? And so it's a little odd that they're not getting this analogy. I mean, it would make sense if we heard this for the first time today, didn't get it. We're not living in a farming society out here. Maybe a little bit. Some of you live up in the Pennsylvania area, right? But for the rest of us in the burbs here, I mean, we're not shepherds, we're not sheep, we're not familiar with the analogy. A shepherd and a fisherman were tied for, like, what's the number one job everybody had back then? You were either a shepherd or a fisherman. So the whole shepherd-sheep analogy shouldn't really throw them through a loop. It is very common, maybe not so much in 2023, but back in the first century, it was. So Jesus is going to clarify. And here's what he says, verse 7. He says again, "Truly I tell you." All right, guys, come on. Get this, is what he's saying. "I am the gate," he says, "for the sheep." Now he says, "I am the gate." This is going to be another one of the 7 I am statements that Jesus makes in the Gospel of John alone, right? A few chapters back, "I am the bread of life," after Jesus fed the 5,000. Then chapter ago, "I am the light of the world." Now here he says, "I am the gate," right? He says, "I'm the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers." The sheep didn't listen to them, right? Remember the context of what just happened in the last chapter. This is what Jesus is making comments on. What just happened in the last chapter? Well, who did we meet last chapter? We met our buddy, Blind Bart. Remember Blind Bart? Jesus healed this guy born from blindness. The Pharisees, the religious leaders, the shepherds of the day didn't believe him. They interviewed him twice, didn't believe him either time, brought his parents in, interviewed his parents, didn't believe the parents. They end up kicking Blind Bart out, right? So listen, don't miss what's happening. Here's the shepherds kicking one of the sheep out, and here comes Jesus. What did Jesus do after he got kicked out? Remember, what did he do? He went to go look for him. and found him and shared the truth about who he was. And so Jesus, the good shepherd, goes after the sheep that the bad shepherds kicked out, right? He calls them thieves and robbers. They're not about the sheep. They don't care about the sheep. They care about themselves. They care about their own position and their own power and their own status. They don't care about others, Jesus is saying. And so he goes on again and says it again in verse 9. I am the gate. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. That verse is so rich. We're going to come back to unpack it there. This next verse is so rich. He says, a thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. Jesus says, not me. I have come so that you might have life and have it in abundance. Verse 11, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, since he's not the shepherd, he doesn't own the sheep, he leaves the sheep. He runs away when he sees a wolf coming. The wolf then snatches and scatters the sheep. This happens because he's a hired hand. He doesn't care about the sheep. I'm the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. So we'll just pause here. We're going to get about halfway through chapter 10 here, but we'll pause right here for now. And so much in here for us to unpack about the sheep and the shepherd and the truths that Jesus is sharing here. And so since we're not living in the first century, and I'm assuming that most of you are not shepherds or sheep farmers, that, let me give you a little bit of background and understanding so that you can appreciate this, because it might be hard to kind of picture. So what shepherds would do is often take their sheep and often have to travel far away from home in order to find enough food and enough water for their flock. So they would travel away, and scattered kind of throughout the area, the shepherds would have built different like stone enclosements, like sheep pens. It would look something like this, right? They would either be an oval or a circular thing that they would build out of stone, and then they would keep their sheep in there at night, and then they wouldn't close the gate at night, because most of them didn't have a gate. And what the shepherds would do is they would literally lay down in the opening where the gate would be. And that way, no sheep were getting out and no harm was getting in. And so the shepherds would literally lay down their lives on the ground for their sheep. Jesus says that, and he has another meaning in mind when he talks about being the shepherd, laying down his life. But it would look something like this. Often what would happen is you'd have a couple different flocks and a couple different shepherds out, and as nighttime comes, you take 2 or 3 different flocks and you put them all in the same pen. And, you might think, well, how do they know would somebody steal somebody else's sheep? I mean, they're all white and fluffy, right? How do you know whose is whose? And so the shepherd didn't have to necessarily figure out whose was whose, because all that they would do is in the morning, they would get up, and the shepherd would use his call and speak out to his sheep, and his sheep would recognize his voice and would follow him out, and the rest of the sheep would stay. While the sheep belonging to that shepherd, he would lead them out. And so this is the scene, this is the setting, this is the way shepherding was done back then. And so Jesus is drawing on this analogy to teach a very important truth about us and about him. As a matter of fact, there's 5 of them I think I want to share with you this morning, at least 5 in this passage that I want to draw out and I want to share with you. And as I was thinking about these 5 truths and looking them over this week, chances are none of these are going to be new to you, right? None of them are like, I never thought of that before, or I never heard that before. And so the point this morning is not to teach you something new. Chances are you're going to have heard these 5 truths before. Rather, my heart this morning, my hope this morning is to stir the heart and the minds of the flock, of the sheep, and remind them of the best way to relate to the shepherd. Because I don't know about you, sometimes as a sheep, you know what? We wander. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the one I love. Sometimes sheep wander. And so this morning, it's not something new or deep or revelatory. It's more just a stir and a reminder for us as sheep, the most important thing, the way that we can relate to the shepherd, okay? 5 of them I'm going to share with you. So if you want to jot these down or take a picture of them, I think, so you can reflect on these, I think it's really, really important for us all as sheep to remember these 5 truths. Here's truth number 1, okay? As we go back and we'll unpack what we've read so far. Truth number 1 is this: there's many dangers in the world. Right? As sheep, the world that we live in has lots of dangers, lots of opportunities for us as sheep to get hurt. Jesus warned us about it 3 times in this little passage that we just read. He's warning about that. Verse 1, he said, "Truly I tell you, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way is a thief and a robber." Then again in verse 8, "All who came before me, thieves and robbers." Then again in verse 10, "A thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy." Jesus is wanting his sheep to understand there are dangers out there. And if you're a sheep, you're very susceptible to danger. It's interesting, the word here for thief, the Greek word for thief is the word kleptos. Kleptos. Does it sound like a word that we know in the English language? What's it sound like? Kleptomaniac. What's a kleptomaniac? You can look it up in Webster's dictionary. It is somebody that has the uncontrollable impulse to steal. It's a kleptomaniac. The uncontrollable impulse to steal. We call that person a klepto. And Jesus says that's what the enemy is. He has this uncontrollable impulse to steal from the sheep. He wants to steal your joy. He wants to steal your contentment. He wants to steal your peace. He wants to replace it with anxiety, anger, depression. He wants to steal our unity and create disunity and division and anger and hatred. Listen, everything that we're seeing now in the world is the fruit, not of the Spirit, it's the fruit of the enemy. He's a thief, and this is what he's done. And he's come and he's turned the sheep all on each other. That's what the enemy does. He's a kleptos. He's a kleptomaniac. He's a thief and a stealer. And there's so many dangers for the sheep in the world. So Jesus said there's a wolf that will come and get the sheep, scatter the sheep. Later in the Bible, in 1 Peter, the enemy is described as a lion, a roaring lion who's looking to devour people. And so there's so many things in the world. Listen, students, young people, there's so many things in the world where the enemy will tempt you to leave the pen, will tempt you as a sheep to just try this, to just go over here. He will fool you into thinking that the worst place, the lamest place to be, is just to stay with the shepherd in the pen. All the fun is out here. And what Jesus wants to say is all the danger is out there. Truth number 1 is there's lots of dangers in the world. This morning, I want you to think through your particular danger. I want you to think through, all of us have our kryptonite, right? That thing that just gets you. It's the thing that you can't shake. It's the thing that always kind of has victory over you. It's the thing that you've promised God you wouldn't be or you wouldn't do or you wouldn't partake in again and again and again. And it just continues to pull you away from the safety of the shepherd and the pen. It's a temptation. It's a thing that is stealing life from you, stealing peace from you, stealing joy from you, and you can't shake it. And it's like, how do I have victory here? How do I win here? That's truth number 2, Jesus is going to tell us. Truth number 2 is this, is that you and I need a shepherd. We need a shepherd. We need the safety, we need the protection, we need the guidance of the shepherd. Listen, without a shepherd, the sheep are toast, right? The sheep are done for without a shepherd. You want to know why? Sheep are completely defenseless. They have no defense mechanisms. The worst thing they can do is like they have no way to defend themselves. As a matter of fact, sheep are pacifist vegetarians. I mean, you want to talk about a woke animal, that's what a sheep is, right? They will not attack another animal, and they will not eat meat. And so, I mean, they are completely helpless. If a sheep falls over, it cannot right itself back up. The weight of the wool gets them over, and they can't get themselves back up. They need a shepherd to come and to pick themselves back up. They can't defend themselves. They're actually not very bright. They will stay in one spot and just keep munching on the same grass, all the way down to the dirt, and they will not leave. There could be a fresh field 50 yards away with water there, and they will stay here. They have no sense of direction. They don't know where they should go. They need the shepherd to lead them. All throughout the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, we're called sheep. And it's an interesting analogy that God makes with us. Not only are they helpless, I would just say, after looking at all the ways and the character traits of sheep, I mean, they're just pretty dumb. They're not very bright animals. They're dumb. You're not convinced? Go ahead, watch this video. There we are. That God could have chose any animal to compare us to. But that's the one. 400 times in the scripture, he said, that's who we are. I ain't arguing. We need a shepherd. On our own, we're no good. We are no good. We're no match. We have no defense against the enemy on our own. We think we're smart on our own. We get ourselves in trouble on our own. We need a shepherd. And here's the good news. We have a shepherd, and his name is Jesus, and he makes us wonderful promises. Like in verse 10, he said, I have come so that you, put your name in there, I have come so that Joe might have life and have it in abundance. Put your name in there. Jesus has come so that your name might have life, real life. Jesus isn't stingy. He says an abundant life. How do you know how to live life? What is the good life? What is the abundant life? It's life, watch, when the sheep comes to the shepherd. When the sheep stays with the shepherd. This is the promise of Jesus. Verse 11, he says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. We have a shepherd that would die for us. That did die for us. Verse 14, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. You have a relationship with the shepherd. Listen, God is not some distant deity far away, the big guy upstairs that you just check in with once in a while. No. He says, I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. There's an intimacy involved in this relationship between the sheep and the shepherd. He knows you. And he wants you to know him. This is good news for those of us that are susceptible to dangers in the world. We have a shepherd who's a provider and a protector. Listen, here's another thing I want to say to you. For some of you, you need to hear this because we get mixed up sometimes. And we do the wrong role. We flip them. Here's what you need to hear this morning. You are not required to shepherd yourself. You can't. The fact that Jesus chose this analogy as the shepherd and the sheep is that this is the role he wants to play, and this is the role that we play. And the role of the sheep is just to come to the shepherd. And you are not required to shepherd yourself, to fend for yourself, to care for yourself, to figure it all out yourself, to just do life yourself. See, this is what sometimes happens to those of us, is that we're sheep, but we think we should be shepherds. And we think we should be in charge, and we think we should be the leader, and we forget about the true shepherd, and we try to do things on our own. And we usually end up like that sheep, and then we recognize, I'm not the shepherd. So listen, those of you who feel the need to just figure it all out, let me just relieve you of duty this morning. We have a shepherd. It's not you, it's not me. We have a good shepherd. His name is Jesus. We're the sheep. And we get in big trouble when we try to play the role of shepherd when we're actually just sheep, right? So, what's the sheep do? The sheep doesn't act like a shepherd. The sheep goes to the shepherd, stays close to the shepherd. Let me remind you of this beautiful passage, Psalm 23, that many of you know so well, a psalm of David, who himself was a shepherd. And he said, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters." So he's the one who's going to guide you. He's the one that's going to provide for you. He's the one who's going to lead you. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we live in a world where there's dangers and there's thieves and temptation and there's brokenness and pain, and we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear evil. Why? Because the shepherd is right there with you. And his rod and his staff, they will bring comfort to you and protection for you and provision. And so listen, the job of the sheep is to stay close to the shepherd. Your job this week is to stay close to the shepherd. Don't act like a shepherd. Stay close to the shepherd. Truth number one is lots of dangers out there. Truth number two, we need a shepherd. Truth number three, we need a flock. You need a flock. You need other sheep. You want to know what's the most dangerous position for a sheep? By himself. Away from the flock. Isolated, right? And this is a popular thing today as more and more people get frustrated and disenfranchised with the church. And some, perhaps for good reasons, hurt and wounded by the church, as the church hasn't maybe done the best job of bringing people to the loving shepherd. But then they go too far and make a case for, I don't need a flock, I just need Jesus. I don't need a church, I just need Jesus. Which is just, there's no flock of one. There's no shepherd that has a flock of one. Anywhere. There's always going to be a community of a flock, a gathering of people together that the shepherd tends to. And so this morning, you need to know you're not made to be alone. It's really dangerous for you to wander away from the people of God, the flock of God. You need other sheep. It's the way God made it to work. We're going to talk a lot more about this in the fall. We got a whole weekend dedicated to in September, so I don't want to say too much about this now. We have been, probably for the last year or so, really since we became Next, stepping back and really looking at the way we've done groups. The first 10 years of this church, we pushed groups hard all the time. Many of you are in groups because we led you to groups, not because it's our church strategy or we just think this is the way, but because we think it's biblical. We think this is the way that the Bible should be, or this is the way that you should be, because we're sheep that need to belong together. And so we are re-looking at the way that we're doing groups. We're going to roll it out to you in September. I'm super excited about it. Right now we have about half of you in groups. So about half of you are not. And so I say this to you as your local shepherd, as the under shepherd of Jesus, the chief shepherd to the flock that I love and care for, is that you're not made to do life alone. And I don't want you to believe the lie that you don't need others. No matter what your personality type is, no matter what your schedule is, no matter where you live, you need other sheep that you're doing life with. You can say, well, I'm part of this flock. I'm part of this flock. This is not the flock. I mean, there's 800 and some people that have come through the doors in the last year and a half that call Next home. That's a really big flock. That's not doing life. You're not doing life with 800 people. We're not doing life now, right? Doing life is sitting in circles with small groups of people, not sitting in rows with 300 people. And so my encouragement, I'm just kind of telling you where we're going to go, is to lovingly push you to not stay in isolation. It's dangerous for you. It is dangerous for the sheep to isolate, that you need people that know the real you and that you know the real them, and you're caring for them and they're caring for you, and you're doing life together. And so not only do you need a shepherd, but you need a flock. You're made as a sheep to be part of a flock. We'll talk more about that in September. Here's truth number 4, okay? Number 1, it's dangerous out there. Number 2, you need a shepherd. Number 3, you need a flock. Truth number 4 is that it's so important that you and I learn to recognize the voice of the shepherd. That we learn to recognize the shepherd's voice. Jesus said this, the gatekeeper opens it for him, and the sheep hear his voice. So listen to me. We have a shepherd that speaks, and sheep are designed to hear the voice of the shepherd. There's many of you that believe, A, our shepherd doesn't speak, or B, you can't hear God's voice. And my hope today is to help you get over that. Ultimately, what I believe is just a lie that the enemy has gotten you to believe, that we have a mute shepherd or I'm deaf, spiritually speaking. Neither of those things, I believe, are true. Listen, the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought all his own outside, he goes ahead of them. The sheep follow him because they know his voice. The whole picture of the Christian life is that you follow Jesus by hearing from him. And he's going to lead you. That is a picture of the Christian life. Not that you just go to a building every once in a while and subscribe to a set of doctrinal beliefs. That makes me a Christian. That makes you a person that believes certain things and has certain practices. The picture of Christianity is you in a relationship as a sheep with the shepherd, and you follow him. And he speaks to you, and he calls to you, and he guides you, and he leads you, and he protects you. And you've got to learn to hear his voice. I would say it like this. It's one of the most important parts of the Christian life, is learning to recognize and hear and obey the voice of the shepherd. It is one of the most important parts of the Christian life, hearing from God and then obeying what he says in a relationship, right? I mean, when I call to my dog, right? When I call to my dog, her name's Sasha. When I call her name, I know she hears, and I want her to obey. And 99% of the time, she obeys. She comes when I call her, unless she's outside and she sees another animal. And then I lose that one, right? I lose that one. But when I call her, she hears and she obeys. And she comes because I'm the master and she's the follower, right? You know what you call a dog that when you call it, it doesn't come? A cat. That's a cat. That's what a cat will do, right? Cat will. And please, don't come out and, well, no, you haven't met my cat. My cat. Your cat happened to walk into the room when you said something. I promise you that cat's doing whatever it wants. It ain't listening to you, all right? So, don't send me cat emails, please, all right? When Jesus, the master, calls, the sheep hear, and the master expects the sheep to obey. And one of the great lies of the enemy is to get you to believe, God doesn't talk to me. I can't hear God. He must not love me. That's not part of my relationship. And this is why we're going to save time at the end. We're going to practice today. Because I am convinced that the shepherd, I mean, not just because of like my experience or not just because it's my opinion. I'm talking about on the authority of Scripture that God wants to speak to you, that the Father wants to speak to the child, the shepherd wants to speak to the sheep, verses upon verses upon verses that confirm that. The fact that you're here today, that you have believed in Jesus, proves that you heard the call of him on your life and you said yes to Christ. You responded to his invitation to him in your life. You said yes. It proves that you can hear God. Here's our problem today is that we have so much noise in our lives that we cannot distinguish the voice of God. There's more noise than ever before. And we have more voices calling to us. I mean, right? There's so much static in our lives, surrounding noise, constant feed of social media things, constant feed of new apps coming on our TV that we can sit down for 7 hours straight and binge watch a whole season of something. There's this constant noise of clatter and static and all this kind of thing that we miss the most important voice that whispers to your soul. And perhaps part of the reason is we got too much other noise. We don't know how to get quiet. Perhaps part of the problem is not only do we not know how to get quiet, we're too busy to even make time to get quiet. See, God's not going to speak to you through your rush time. He wants you to sit with him. The best thing the sheep can do is go sit with the shepherd. Every day, the most important time of your day is where you go sit with the shepherd. And you come and you sit with the shepherd. Listen, the primary way he's going to speak to you, no doubt, is his word. It's the most important way he's going to speak to you. But he also speaks personally to the children of God. Believe that the Father speaks to the children, that he's going to guide you specifically. He's going to lead you. He's got truth he wants to tell you. He wants to help you. He's for you. He's not against you. And so we're going to practice with that in the end. But to help you know how important it is for you as the sheep to learn to hear the voice that there's other voices calling to you. You have to quiet them. You have to sometimes shut them out. Sometimes it's your own voice. I've told you before, the biggest thing you can do as a sheep is to come to the shepherd and learn to shift your will into neutral and just say, all right, Lord, here I am. Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah said, here I am, Lord. Speak, your servant is listening. Here I am. Right? You've got to learn to still the other voices and learn to listen only to the shepherd's voice. I got another video for you of people trying to call sheep, and then a shepherd comes and calls the sheep. Go ahead and watch it out.
One more time.
They gave him the words to use to call the sheep. This is the words the shepherd will use to call the sheep. It's person 1. Didn't go well. Here's person 2.
Look at them. Isn't that amazing?
The sheep hear the shepherd's voice and learn to come to the sound of the voice of the shepherd. It's one of the most important things that you can do. Can I encourage you this week? Carve out time. You got to make time. You're going to have to fight for the time to do what's important to you. That you would come and that you would sit with the shepherd. And start with praying. Say, Lord, quiet my heart, quiet my ears, quiet my mind. I want to hear from you alone. Quiet any other voices, the voice of the enemy. You get in his word. When you open the Bible, the shepherd shows up and speaks to you. And then dialogue with him. Ask him questions. I ask God questions all the time. Learn to ask God questions. Learn to listen and dialogue with the shepherd as the sheep. It's dangerous out there. You need a shepherd. You need a flock. You got to hear the shepherd's voice. And here's truth number 5 that I'll share with you this morning, and that's this. You are either part of Jesus' flock or you're not. You're like, what do you mean? Well, it's very black and white. I'm going to read you from John 10 here what Jesus says. Because there's this idea out there of kind of, well, I don't know, I'm kind of in the middle. You're kind of like a part-time Christian. Like I'm kind of in, kind of not in. And what Jesus is going to share, and the truth that you need to get this morning, is that you are either part of the flock of Jesus with him as your shepherd, or you're not. That there is no room for this kind of wishy-washy middle ground that some of us like to think exists. This is what Jesus said in verse 9. He says, I am the gate. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. So here's what Jesus is saying. You're either part of his flock or not. He's the gate. And so what he's saying is the way to come into pasture, which is another metaphor, it's a picture for what ultimately is going to be heaven, where there's going to be green pastures and streams of water. And so what Jesus is saying is he is the only gate to come through to experience pasture, an abundant life, to experience heaven. It is Jesus the gate. And listen, you've either come through the gate into his sheep pen and you're part of his flock, or you're not. There's no middle ground. You're either in or you're out. You either said yes to Jesus being the shepherd, or you said no by default. There's no middle ground. He is the gate. Later on, in a couple chapters, Jesus is going to make it even more exclusive when he says, I am the way and the truth and the life. And then he says, no one comes to the Father except through me. He's going to make it even more exclusive. And so, this is not Christianity being exclusive. This is Jesus, God, being exclusive, saying he's the gate. And so you've either said yes to Jesus being the gate, believed in him, come through the gate, or you haven't. It's really that black and white. I'm going to give you a chance, because chances are there's somebody here today that has not, that you're either in this, which doesn't exist, middle ground, or you just have not made that decision to say yes to Jesus being the gate. I'm going to give you a chance at the end. And this is how the passage ends, and we'll close here. Jesus says, I have other sheep that are not from this sheep pen. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. Who's he talking about? I got other sheep that are not of the sheep pen. Who's he talking about? Anybody? He's talking about us Gentiles, right? Unless you're a Jewish person here. For the rest of us Gentiles, Jesus was speaking to the Jews. And it was, the whole Old Testament was about God's people, Israel. And now Jesus is coming saying, I got a whole other group of sheep over here of Gentiles, other nationalities and other races and other, right? They're going to come and Jesus is going to bring them in. Here's what he says. There will be one flock, one shepherd, right? Coming together under Jesus, the chief shepherd. And then he said, that's why the Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I might take it up again. No one takes it from me. Jesus saying, I'm the shepherd doing this on my own. I lay it down on my own. I have the right to lay it down, and I have the right to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. What an amazing shepherd fellowship we have in Jesus. Verse 19. Again, the Jews were divided because of these words. Right? And we're just seeing it week after week after week. Listen, this is why John is writing John. He is forcing you to divide, or at least figure out who is Jesus. He's really forcing you to decide, not divide. He's forcing you, in a sense, to decide and then divide. Who is Jesus? Do you believe Jesus is the bread of life? Do you believe he's the light of the world? Do you believe he's the gate through which you find eternal life? Right? He's going to make you decide. There is no middle ground. He either isn't or he is. And so we see the division even here. They were divided. Many of them were saying, he has a demon. He's crazy. Why are you listening to him? And others were saying, these aren't the words of someone demon-possessed. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? I mean, look at blind Bart over there, right? There's no way this guy's demon-possessed. And that's where we'll stop today. As to who do you say Jesus is? 500 years earlier, 500 years earlier, God spoke to an Old Testament man named Ezekiel, who became a prophet. And God said, Ezekiel, the shepherds are not taking care of the people. I'm going to provide a shepherd for good. And so 500 years before Jesus, Ezekiel chapter 34, this is God. God says, I will save my flock, and they will no longer be prey. And I will judge between one sheep and another. Listen, God knows. God knows your heart. You might fool people. Sitting in this building doesn't mean you're part of Jesus' flock. God knows if you're in or you're out. God knows. He says, I will establish over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he will shepherd them, and he will tend them himself and will be their shepherd. Now, there's only one problem with this verse 23, is that David, at the time of writing of Ezekiel, 500 years before Jesus, David has been dead for 400 years. So what's going on here in Ezekiel? Here's what God is saying. This is a prophecy. This is a messianic prophecy of God saying that there will come one from the line of David. That was a prophecy, too, that he was going to be king. David was a king. The royal bloodline has to... So Jesus was going to come from the line of David. He was going to be a shepherd like his father David was. And he's going to be the one who's going to be the one shepherd for all people. This verse is a prophecy about Jesus. And 500 years later, Jesus shows up and claims to be the good shepherd and says specifically, I'm the gate. The only way into my flock is to come through me. That's the message of hope that we bring to the world. There is a good shepherd. Our goal as sheep is not to tell the other sheep they're wrong. Our goal as sheep is to tell the other sheep about our shepherd, Jesus. We can't change the world. We can't fix the world. We can only be faithful to telling them and pointing the way to the one shepherd who can change people from the inside out, Jesus. And so we're going to let the shepherd just minister to us for a minute. I'm just going to invite you to close your eyes and to bow your heads. And I know the shepherd wants to speak to you this morning. And so here's what I'm just going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask that even just right now, take a minute, would you just picture Jesus just sitting in a chair across from you. You're the sheep, he's the shepherd. You've come to him, and Jesus is there. And he wants to talk to you. And I want you just to ask Jesus, say, Jesus, I want you just to quiet my heart and my mind. Jesus, I only want to hear from you right now. Block all other voices. Jesus, block all other noise. I just want to hear from you. Jesus, give me faith, even right now. I want to hear from you. And I want you just to ask Jesus a question. Here's the question. Jesus, as a sheep, shepherd, what do you want to say to me today? Shepherd, what do you want to say to me today? Listen, if you're hearing negative thoughts, if you're hearing condemnation, if you're hearing things like I'm disappointed in you, or you're a failure to me, or you're not good enough, listen, this is the part of the problem why we don't hear the shepherd's voice. We don't know enough to recognize that's not the shepherd. That's the wolf. That's the enemy. God does not condemn. God does not put down. God does not hate. God does not disown. That's the voice of the enemy. So right now, if that was you, if those were the first thoughts that came to mind, you just need to say, God, help me to hear your voice only. Enemy, shut up. be quiet. I don't want to hear your voice. In the name of Jesus, be quiet. I want to hear Jesus' voice only. As a matter of fact, just say this, Jesus, even right now, would you just give me an encouraging word to my heart? Jesus, speak encouragement to my heart right now. This is a conversation that needs to happen every day with you and the shepherd. I've done 4 minutes here. Take 10, 15 minutes a day. Get alone. Get quiet. And sit with the shepherd. Sit with his word. Let him speak to you. And if you're here and you've never said yes to the shepherd, you've never said yes to Jesus being the gate, and this is where we're done. I want you to pray this. Jesus, today I say yes. Today I get you're the gate. Today I'm walking through the gate. I'm saying yes to being saved by you. I confess I've wandered. I confess that I've sinned against you. Jesus, today, thank you for dying for me. Save me. I want to be a part of your flock. I want you as the shepherd. Thank you, Jesus. I'm going to ask our prayer team to come. You can do one of three things right now. Like we've done in the past. One, you can quietly leave. Go ahead and hang out in the gathering place and make all the noise that you want. But I ask you to quietly leave. Two, you can stay where you're at. You're not done. God still wants to talk with you and still wants to meet you. Three, let our prayer team pray for you. Prayer team, come. Let our prayer team pray for you. Some of you are like, you're sheep, and you're like, I have been beaten up by this world. I've been attacked. I've just been abused. I am having a hard time existing in this world, and you need somebody to pray for you. Come and be prayed for. We're a prayer team. Or if you just said yes to Jesus, come and be prayed for, and tell a person, I just said yes to Jesus. One of those three things. You quietly leave, stay in your seat and pray, or come up and be prayed for. Love you, flock. God bless you. Have a great rest of the week. We'll see you.